So I think we should start, guys. So let's go ahead, all right? So hello, everybody. Welcome to 1 is to X. I'm really glad that you guys are joining us today. Thank you for taking the time of checking out our webinars. And well, this is part of a series of webinars that we're having here at 1 is to X, where we're gonna be talking about computational design through the eyes of our experts here at the company, right? So today we have a very special guest because he is very acquainted with sustainability, but also informs his work with technologies like computational design. So before I begin, I would like to introduce myself first. Hello, everyone. My name is Arad Jaques. I am an architect and BIM coordinator. I am the director of Formación Arco, which is a company here in Mexico that aims to educate people about topics surrounding BIM. I have been studying here in Mexico, and I'm also part of the 1 is to X team, all right? So today's guest is Raghav Swarup. Let me go ahead and introduce you to him. Raghav Swarup is a London-based architect who specializes in the field of environmental design. Originally from India, he obtained a bachelor's degree in architecture from the Amity School of Architecture and Planning. There we go. I think that the screen froze for a minute, right? And later received a master's degree with distinction in sustainable environmental design from the prestigious Architectural Association School of Architecture. Raghav has worked at various firms as an architect, including senior architect at Morphogenesis, and is currently an architectural designer at Binoy, London. He's been a part of the review panel of the Architectural Association to help critique, guide, and assess the work of postgraduate students in the field of environmental design. Raghav is passionate about creating innovative designs that promote sustainability and environmental consciousness within the built environment, and is a determined champion for amalgamating dynamic design with a bioclimatic workflow. He's also been a part of these projects, which is the Intellian Park, a 5 million square foot IT complex, which is certified with the Grade A LEED Platinum certification. The Citus of Corporate Office, which is in Ahmedabad, which is featuring one of the world's largest doubly curved microclimactic screen, and Konos, which is a hyper-luxury mixed-use development in Riyadh. So thank you so much for joining us today, Raghav. How are you doing?
Thanks, Arad, for that really nice introduction and for having me on this webinar. I'm quite excited because this topic is something that's quite close to my heart. So it's going to be nice to talk about.
Thank you. Thank you for taking the time for joining us and sharing us some of your expertise with us today in this Saturday. So thank you, guys.
Yeah, absolutely.
So shall we begin with the topics that we have for today? Because we have a pretty busy schedule.
Yeah, let's get started then.
Excellent. So I want to read it back to the very start of your career. I want to know what was your early career like? And I mean, how did you know that you wanted to be an architect? How did you start working as an architect? And can you share what was your first experience in the architecture field?
Yeah, so that's going back quite a bit now, but yeah, I think I've always been somebody who had an interest both in design as well as, in technology. And that is, I think, one of the aspects that drove me towards architecture in the first place. But straight out of architecture school, like most other students, I think I was quite confused as to what exactly is it that I want to do, what sort of projects do I want to work on, what typologies would be more interesting to work on. But since I had, like I said, an interest in design and technology both, I decided to look up firms that were sort of amalgamating design technology in their processes, and firms where I would, be able to maybe get maximum exposure to different typologies and different projects. And that's when I came across Morphogenesis, which was my first job. In fact, I worked there for then 4 years as an architect, and then later as a senior architect. And I think I was quite fortunate there to work on some really large scale projects, which, ranged from commercial to residential and workplace sort of projects. So that was, I think, my sort of early experience and how I got into that. And something that from the time there itself, I started to get acquainted more with what sustainability, because it was something that was a part of their design philosophy. Um, at that moment, to be honest, I did not have that much of a knowledge of it, but it just piqued my interest. And during my time there, I realized that there was a growing demand even in the market. There were many clients who were asking for certain green building certifications, and yeah, so all of that sort of started to generate my interest towards sustainability. So I think, yeah, to sum that up, I think it was design and technology, and that's been a driving factor since the beginning, and still is today in my career.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So also like talking about some of the projects that we mentioned in the beginning, they seem to focus heavily on the aspect of like green buildings and sustainability. And you also mentioned about like the first time that you got acquainted with the topic. So I want to know what got you engaged in this field of sustainable design? Like what made you decide to jump on this field?
Right. So, I mean, I've always considered myself to be a little, like a person who likes to look at the bigger picture, look at things that have a wide application. And I think during my time at Morphogenesis as well, because I got to work on really large projects, I got to understand that a large project can mean a potentially very large impact, architecturally speaking, environmentally speaking. Also, as I mentioned, at Morphogenesis, part of their design philosophy, sustainability was a key aspect. And from there, I started to get introduced to a lot of passive design strategies. And like you mentioned, in some of the projects that you mentioned in the beginning, we got to implement a lot of those strategies as well. But that was, maybe the beginning of my interest. And then how I then went further was because I wanted to gain, maybe a deeper understanding of some of those aspects. And that's when I went to the Architectural Association, which is in London. It's one of the most prestigious schools, and they have a great program for sustainable environmental design. And I went there, and that's where I think that interest that I had initially developed grew into a much deeper passion. And today that's what I like to work with, and I like to spread awareness about it as much as I can to as many people as I can.
Perfect. So I want to start from what you mentioned about spreading awareness, right? So we know that sustainability is a very extensive topic, and it can look very different in different fields, different professions, and can have multiple ramifications into different fields. But specifically talking about architecture, what do you think is the role that we play, like architects and designers play, in promoting sustainability? And how can we integrate sustainability into our work?
Right. So, I mean, I think that's bang on, that sustainability is an extremely extensive sort of a topic. And if you look at the sustainability development goals, which are actually set out by the United Nations, you can see on the screen, there are a bunch of them. But the ones that I feel architects and designers can really target and impact are the environmental, the ones in the middle. And I think there is where the key role of architects and designers come in. In fact, 1:X, in fact, posted a couple of posts leading up to this webinar where they mentioned how 40% of global carbon emissions are coming from the building sector. And I think that's something that's really important to highlight. But an other important aspect also is that these carbon emissions are at an all-time high right now. If you actually look at the data, it says that the global carbon emissions over the last 30 years are equivalent to what it was over the previous 250 to 300 years. So we've almost increased the rate of our carbon emissions by 8 to 10 times. So, I mean, I don't think anything makes it more apparent the need and the urgency for architects and designers to sort of be within this field. So I think it's really, really important. I think that's, the role part of it. And I think the second part of your question was about integration. And I think for that, it's the first and foremost thing I would say is that it's something that becomes a way of life. It's something that it has to be ingrained in your basic design making and your decision making and your design thinking. It has to be integrated from the very first steps of the project. It's not something that you start designing and then you're like, oh, how can I make this building sustainable? I don't think that's the right workflow or methodology. And one of the key aspects to always keep in mind is that the climate and the context of wherever it is that you're designing are paramount aspects, and you have to build in concert with them and not in conflict. And I think that's really, really important for architects and designers to always consider.
Excellent. And yeah, I mean, just to make echo what you said about the carbon emissions, especially right now, I think we are on like the breaking point, right? Considering that now more than ever people live in cities, and that this fraction of people that live in cities will become bigger and bigger in the coming years. So I think it's very important what you said about integrating it and not just like having a building and then just making sure that it's green or has trees on top of the roof, right?
Yeah, so, exactly. Yeah, I think it becomes like I said, it needs to be integrated into basic decision sort of making and design thinking. Because if you just think that we can in a building and then just slap on a particular facade or slap on a particular sort of material, and that'll give us a certain green certification. That's not the right way. Definitely not the right way to approach this topic, because it's not only to check those boxes which a certification may give you, but it's a wider application of sustainability in a larger picture, right? How you are impacting the environment, what is the carbon footprint, all of those things. And I think it's one thing to do it in our project, but it's also something, and that's why I mentioned that it becomes a way of life. It's something that you need to be aware and sensitive to as even as individuals, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for sharing that as well. I think it's very important for us to recognize that, architects and construction industry does have an impact. I mean, it's the biggest influencer, in the carbon emissions worldwide. So I think we need to step it up as professionals worldwide and, start looking into this.
Yeah.
So coming back to an earlier topic about like, how do you get acquainted with your, the branches of the professional path that you are working with? I want to know now, how did you get interested, or how do you get attracted to the field of computational design? I mean, what was the thing that made you aware of it, and what made you jump into getting to know more about computational design, and then later on becoming a computational designer?
Yeah, I think as I mentioned, I mean, I've always been into technology, and through my interest in sustainability, I wanted to also find a way that I myself can better understand, I can visualize, and I'm able to also further explain to others some of the concepts that are related to environmental design. And I think that's where computational design comes in. It's something that can make your workflow much faster. It's something that can break down complex information into maybe simpler aspects. So yeah, that's I think how I came into it. And then, like I mentioned, I was doing my master's at the Architectural Association. So this was something that was introduced to us there as well. And then it developed into, I think, just a passion. And I think because of that, I've gone beyond and then further explored a lot of avenues to do with computational environmental design, to be more precise, and see how I can integrate it into the various projects that I've been working on.
Perfect. So, I mean, now talking about the integration between technology and sustainability, Um, can you give us like a rundown of the type of tools, applications that, um, well, more than the tools, the actual applications, like how can you integrate computational design into sustainability? Because of course we know
Mhm.
that, computational design is technology that often is seen as a driving factor for the, sustainable or the environmental decay. But in your perspective, like how do you think that this can help towards sustainability?
Yeah, I think that's a great question because people may look at computational design with with a completely different perspective, and I don't think that's always accurate. When you talk about sustainable design with computational aspects, then I think there's a very wide range of application. I mean, you can look at the very basic sort of aspects like just understanding the sun's position, understanding solar geometry, and then moving to like much more complex aspects like being able to accurately predict the indoor temperature in a building at any given point in time to understand the associated energy use with that. So if you really break it down, we're looking at in early stages, you can understand the climate, the site context, you can do wind and CFD studies. You can study the impact of the built mass on the urban microclimate. So you can do all of that in early stages. And then when you jump into later stages of a project, then you can do things like glare analysis, illuminance studies, energy use, life cycle carbon assessments. So I mean, yeah, it's almost limitless in a way what the tools can do as long as you know what you want from it.
Mhm.
Because at the end of the day, like you said, computation design is it's just a sequence of let's say logical processes which just solve complex problems for you. So you need to be the master and make it do what you want, but you need to know what you want from it, and then, like I said, it can almost have limitless applications. So I think it's very useful in the field, and more and more I think people are now starting to adopt and see these benefits.
Mhm. Perfect, perfect. So I'm aware that there is this topic called high performance building analysis, which kind of mixes concepts from both ends of computational design and sustainability. So can you give us a rundown of what this is for those of us who might not be very acquainted with the term?
Yeah, I think so I had the director of the program at the Architectural Association I studied. He puts it really well. He says that environmental design is equal to performance plus atmosphere. And I think atmosphere is maybe the passive design and some of the aspects that some of us might be familiar with. But the performance side is basically having a lot of ideas but being able to then test them, and I think that's the basis of what high performance building analysis is. It's to be able to understand whether our design decisions have allowed us to meet some sort of key performance metrics, I think also, like I had said, the range of applications that some of these tools have, they can then significantly improve building performance. So whether you're looking at energy consumption, daylight, carbon emissions, or even if you look at softer aspects such as occupant health, comfort, well-being, all of these aspects can be through quantifiable data. You can look at where you stand and then see ways to improve them. So I think that's probably the best way to define high performance building analysis is
Mhm.
that you see the performance of the building, read the data that the tool might be giving you, and see how you can then improve on all of these various aspects that I was mentioning.
Excellent. I mean, this sounds very interesting, and I think that's it's definitely something that we should all be aware of in order to understand
Mhm.
like what's the potential, right, of combining technology and sustainability. So
Exactly.
now
Uh,
talking about the yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just saying that I think yeah, some of the images that you have up on the screen show some of those applications like I was mentioning, whether it be early stages such as solar access or wind profiles, or if you look at, the later sort of stages where there is HVAC sizing, or there is energy use and things like that.
Perfect. So
Yeah.
now talking about more deeply into the topic, like what tools and what software do you use for this? Like, do you use Revit? Do you use Primavera? Like, what typically you use as an environmental designer in order to tackle these challenges?
Right. So I personally have mostly used, I find myself, I think, most often using the Ladybug family of tools. So these are plugins that come in with Rhino and Grasshopper. So this is Ladybug, Honeybee, Butterfly. These are all these tools which have been developed for the specific purpose of building energy, daylight, climate simulations. They also integrate with other such plugins such as Radiance, which is used for daylight. There is Energy Plus and Open Studio for building energy modeling. For life cycle carbon assessment, I've found OneClick LCA to be very effective. It's a great tool which has a great library of materials, and it helps us very quickly understand the impact of some of our design decisions in terms of both embodied and operational carbon. So these are the ones I most commonly use. There are many other tools. There's IES, there's Climate Studio, OpenFOAM, but I think the Rhino is something that's being used more and more in the industry, and especially in the UK where I'm based, there's a lot of usage of Rhino. And I think because these tools that I mentioned, the Ladybug family, they have a very seamless integration with Rhino. That's why I think I prefer to use them much more. They also now have cloud functionality through their pollination toolkit, so that's quite useful. It can feed data live into your model, so that can be quite useful. You don't have to go into another software, go into another workflow. It's through your own workflow that it can just integrate and feed information back. So that's really useful.
Excellent. So it's almost kind of like a smart workflow, right? Like instead of jumping into different like shattered or segregated parts of the process, it's all straightforward.
Exactly. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing that. And by the way, we are reaching the middle of our agenda for today. And usually at the time where we mention software, people have a lot of questions, have a lot of inquiries about what tools do we use in the industry. So I would like to let everybody know in the audience that if you have any question at any given point, please drop it down in the comments below, or well, not in the comments, but in the chat box below. So we can just go ahead and comment on it. And at the end of the session, we're gonna have a Q&A where we'll be able to respond to your questions live. And in case we don't get to respond to all of those questions, our experts here at 1is2x will be reaching out to you after the session ends to make sure that none of your questions go unanswered, all right? So now let's continue with a topic which is a little bit more hands-on, right? Which is about your current role. Like, can you tell us what does it entail? Like, what do you do in this role, and how do you use computational environments to inform your architectural workflow?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's I think that's a really interesting sort of question, and I think that's something that most people like to know whenever they reach out to me is about the workflow. So yeah, I mean, briefly, I can tell you. So my current role is that of an architectural designer at Binoy in their London studio. I'm also involved with the sustainability design group within the company itself. And I think that's fantastic for me because it's a great way to combine my love for design and passion for sustainability. And I know that there has been, in the industry, there has been this big discussion around specialists versus generalists. But I think I'm happy to be in a position that I think I can get the best of both worlds, so that's been great. But talking about workflow, I can take the example of Binoy. And like I mentioned, we have a sustainability design group. So what that group does is that it takes the experience and knowledge gained over the years by the practice and then it transfers that into practical design solutions to ensure that environmental design is embedded into the process itself. So I think that's what that group does. And then when we look at the workflow itself, I would broadly, divide that into, let's say, 4 parts. So the first part would probably be understanding the climate, which is done by studying dry bulb temperature, relative humidity, wind speed, and wind direction. And then through that, we can map the times of occupant comfort. So that is how we can understand the climate, and these tools are very useful for that. You can understand through that whether these, the climatic conditions are desirable or undesirable at various times of the year. The second, I would say, is master planning. So here, these tools, I think on the previous page you had up just before this, you can see how these tools can help you orient the building volume, help to decide building height, inter-building distance, where we should have open areas on the side, where not to have, where we can place the fenestration on our building facades. Yeah, so through this particular page, you can see that the solar radiation analysis shows you what areas of the site may be comfortable or not be comfortable. The third one would be to do with envelope optimization. So once we have, the master plan in place, then we can use studies such as the incident solar radiation in this case, which you have up, which is to test various optimization strategies. So that can be related to the material selection, that can be related to the glazing type, it can be related to window to wall ratio, window to floor ratios, or it can be shading benefit related or energy related, stuff like that. And finally, the fourth, I would say, is building analysis. As again, in this case, you can see it's a daylight analysis, but it could be related to building energy, heating load, cooling load. In this case, it's a useful daylight illuminance study, which helps us to identify what areas will have glare, what areas are not receiving sufficient daylight, stuff like that. So I think at a broad level, from the early stages of analyzing the climate and context to understanding the master planning, where to place your buildings, where to have the openings, to then coming to the envelope, optimizing that in terms of shading, in terms of window to wall ratios, and finally in terms of actually the high performance analysis of the building itself through daylight and energy simulations. So yeah, that is what I would say is a very typical workflow which we try to integrate in our project. In no way is that an exhaustive list of what the tools can do, but I think it's just a preview of some of the capabilities and some of the basic steps we like to take for our project.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing those images. I think it really enriches the knowledge of people what you do, right? Like what is the approach that you take? Not like we were mentioning earlier, it's not just about like green roofs and stuff like that, but actually delving into everything that entails in like the building, the energy, the solar radiation, the location, the orientation. So yeah, I mean, I think it's really great and very informative what you just mentioned. Now, reeling it back a little bit to what we were discussing earlier about, discussion around sustainability and like how is it becoming like a huge topic of or is main topic of discussion in the recent years. So, I mean, we also are aware that many firms worldwide have started to look into this topic of environmental design as well. So what do you think that implementing these workflows is important for architectural firms? We mentioned previously about architects individually, but now why do you think firms of architecture should start looking into these workflows?
Yeah, I mean, like you mentioned yourself earlier, there is a growing awareness around sustainability, and it's becoming, a very critical topic of discussion. So there is definitely a growing awareness, and with that there comes a growing market demand, right? There have been several agreements and initiatives at a global level, such as the Paris Agreement, There are many bodies in place, such as the IPCC. The UN is doing a lot of work. In the UK itself, the government has set up certain agencies, certain challenges. So there's in the UK, there's a challenge called the REBA 2030 challenge, which aims to bring down the carbon emissions and building energy use. So what I'm trying to say in a broad way is it's not anymore an option, to be honest. I think now it's a requirement and a responsibility that each architectural firm must adopt, and especially firms that are working globally and worldwide. Because if you look at the data, you see that the developing nations are now actually going up in their use of carbon emissions as opposed to the developed nations. And because there's a lot of work being done by global architecture firms in developing nations, it's all the more important for them to be very, very quick to adopt these workflows. So yeah, like I said, it's not an option, it's a responsibility now.
Yes, and I want to augment on the topic of not being optional anymore, right? We were also mentioning about the urban growth of cities that is now becoming bigger and bigger each year. So talking on this point of the what's coming to us when it comes to sustainability and our responsibility in this topic, what do you think are the career opportunities around environmental design that we're going to be seeing in the coming years for both architecture and engineering, but in general, like the AC industry?
Right. So yeah, although there is an increasing awareness and it is now being considered a requirement, there is still a dearth of highly skilled people. There's a dearth of champions in this field, which again then makes it something that is very high demand. Even computational design as a broader subject is in much higher demand than it ever was before, because every architecture practice is trying to optimize their workflows. And I think this is true for both architectural and engineering, sides of this conversation. So whether you're someone who's keen on more architectural roles and inclined towards, the qualitative side, let's say, of environmental design, and you wish for deeper integration with the design process. So whether you're on that side of it, let's say the more architecture and design side, or even if you're on the engineering side or into building physics aspects, more quantitative and performance oriented sides, there are huge opportunities on both sides, because I think, like I mentioned, this is now becoming a requirement. There are norms and government procedures in place. There are so many green building certifications. All architecture firms are moving towards this direction. A lot of global architecture firms have their own in-house teams that are specializing in this or are integrating it within their design process, like we have at Binoy as well. So I think, yeah, this is definitely a very, very it's a great time, to be honest, to be getting into this field, because there is great demand, but not that much of a supply, I think, of really skilled individuals.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's very important to remark on that, because also in fields like even in BIM, I think that people still don't know much about it. Like people, the other day I was talking to somebody here in Mexico, and they think that Revit is enough to know BIM, And I think we are, like you mentioned, at a very special or important point in which, yes, there is demand, but there are not enough people that can supply those skills, right? So now talking about how can you start in this field, and how can you take opportunity into this growing market and the growing opportunities that we have. What advice can you give to somebody who is trying to get into this field? And can you share some tips onto how to start, or to somebody who is seeking to start in this field?
Yeah, sure. I think the number one thing I usually say to everyone about this is that, and especially with computational environmental design, is that don't jump straight into the tool. Don't just start playing around with it to just explore what the tool can do, because the tool can, like I had mentioned earlier, do pretty much anything. What is critical is that you understand the basis of what the tool is actually trying to tell you. There are many people even now who can just run a Grasshopper script to get a certain output. But the real skill lies in analyzing and processing that data, and then being able to understand what is the most efficient way to apply that into our projects. So that's something I keep, I think, telling people is that understand what that data really means, rather than just going straight into the tool. So I think that's something that's really critical. And I would tell anybody that get a basis of understanding in sustainability. What are the aspects that govern sustainability, that govern comfort, that govern energy use, and then start using the tools as literally a tool, right? To then make that go forward. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I like what you mentioned. I think is very important. Not thinking about the tool itself, right? But thinking how can you understand the data, which is, I think, something that many people get stuck on, talking only about the certain software or the certain tool instead of actually understanding that it's just a medium for you to get to point A to point B, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So now talking about more in-depth experience on what you have, both as a professional, but also as a mentor, because you are a part of the Master Computational Design course here at 1is2x. Can you give us a sneak peek into what students can learn from you, after we've discussed all of these points regarding sustainability, computational design? What can they expect to get from you as knowledge?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, going back to your previous question, this could probably be another tip that they can sign up for this course if they want to get started. But no, on a serious note, I think I'm really excited about this course because we have a great team that we've put together of multidisciplinary people. We're all very like-minded, passionate, successful professionals, who are in the field. I myself am one of the lead mentors on the high performance building analysis studio within the course. So I want to be able to transfer that same passion while delivering a comprehensive understanding of the field of sustainability and computational environmental design. And what we'll be covering will be a lot about some of the topics that I've spoken about today, but in a lot more detail, of course, in terms of detailed workflows, optimizing our building, form finding exercises, how to understand life cycle carbon, what those terminologies mean, how we can really integrate them into our daily use, and also bust a lot of myths, I think, that there are to do with this field. People think it might be exorbitantly expensive to integrate it into your project. Some people feel that, oh, you cannot make an exciting or an iconic project if you want to use some of these. So yeah, definitely busting a lot of those myths. And I think the idea for this course was that it's not meant to be a software tutorial, but it's meant to be a platform to pretty much engage with real world design problems and then find the most optimum solutions using computational design. So I think that's how I would probably put it as the intention for this course. So yeah, I think that ties in also exactly with the previous tip that I mentioned, right? That it's not just about the tool, it's about using the tool, as you also rightly mentioned, as a medium. And then and understanding in the real world how that can help us out and make the optimum use of that.
Excellent. Well, thank you for sharing what can people expect to learn, not only from you, but in general from this course. And as you can see, in the screen, we have a multidisciplinary team of people from all around the world that work at the top firms in the world, like Zaha Hadid, the UN Studio, Gensler, you name it, that will help you out into this path of computational design. And also don't worry about it because, or the information regarding the course, because our experts here at 1is2x will also be reaching out to you to get more, to get you more acquainted with this course and what you will be seeing in it. All right. So like I mentioned in the half of this webinar, we're going to open the floor now for some questions to our expert today at this webinar. So let's go ahead and ask some question, guys. I know that people often have uh, very curious inquiries about like what you do as a a professional in the real world. So I would like for everybody to just type their questions in the chat or raise their hand in order to open up the mic, and we can go ahead and discuss a little bit with you. All right. Oops. There we go. So I have one question. They're asking me directly, but they're mentioning what career do you have to study in order to get into environmental design? Like, do you have to be, I guess they're asking if you have to be an architect or an engineer, or if there's a specific field that you have to get into?
Yeah, I think it always helps, right, having an architectural or an engineering background, because you can better understand some of these concepts. So yeah, I would say ideally coming from one of those two fields. And then I think it doesn't really matter at what stage you may be at your career. There are people who might still be in architecture school, who want to then upskill and learn about these, or there might be people who are professionals, been in the field for a number of years, but they also want to learn some of these skills because they feel that it can help them advance their projects. It can help advance their own brand. So there are multiple ways to look at it, and I think yeah, it's quite a broad field in terms of the application, and there are so many different applications to study. There are people who, like I mentioned, a lot of terms during this discussion about building energy modeling, about daylight, and there are people who spend their entire careers on just one of those aspects because they can be so deep and so complex. So yeah, definitely. To answer your question, definitely an architecture and engineering background helps. But once you're in that, you can then go take up any one of these branches and I think have a career in those.
Excellent. Thank you for your response, Raghav. And we have a question from Ishan. So I would like Ishan to unmute themselves so they can have a little bit discussion with Raghav. And their question is, how can we get our clients on board to incorporate these tools for their projects, as most are not willing to pay that amount for it?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and
Hi,
I think
Raghav,
that
Ishan this side.
yeah,
How are
hi,
you doing?
Ishan.
Yeah.
I'm good. Thanks for your question. I think that's one of the key questions that most people in the field and in practices have. But to be honest, I believe that's a myth, because you don't have to pay that much more for it. The question is whether are you looking to check boxes for a green building certification, or are you trying to make a truly sustainable building using passive design techniques, using just basic application of what these tools are telling you. So you can use aspects such as building orientation, understand how the building works with its context. You can understand wind flow patterns. You can understand daylight and energy modeling, and through those aspects itself, you can bring down what your energy consumption of a building may be by 50 to 70%. There are various case studies that show that. So I would say that if you can show your clients that, look, I'm bringing down the energy consumption by that large a number by just passive design techniques, which are not really costing them any money, I think most of them would want to be on board, right? And then also in
Yeah.
terms of some of
So basically, overall, reducing the operational cost of the building in the future.
Exactly. So I think it's about looking at it in the long run and not just as an initial investment.
Yeah.
Even if you look at active design strategies, such as more optimized MEP systems, or if you look at renewables, those might be an upfront cost, but in terms of the building maintenance and the running of the building and the operations, like you said, it's going to, because buildings we don't design for 5 to 10 years. We typically look at the building life for minimum 60 to 70 years. So in that lifetime, it'll definitely be beneficial. So I think more and more people like yourself need to take that to clients and make them aware that it's a myth that green buildings are more expensive.
Right. Thank you.
Thanks, Ishan.
Thank you, Ishan, for your question. There's also another question from Sahej. I am in my final year of architecture. Is it ideal to start a master's degree in sustainability straight away or after work experience?
Yeah. Thanks for your question, Sahej. I think that, like I was mentioning earlier, I don't think there's a right time, to be honest. If you are somebody who's interested in this, I would say go for it straight away. I don't think work experience I don't think it's honestly associated, work experience or not, because I know of people who have had certain years of work experience and then gotten into the field. On the other hand, I know people who, straight out of architecture school gotten into this field. It's about your passion and your interest. I don't think the work experience will matter. And like I said, like, it depends how you want to look at it. If you want to go on the engineering side and building physics side, and more into the computational design side of it, that's one side. Otherwise, you can look at the architectural and design and more, the softer aspects to do with sustainability, and be in a more architectural role. And also there exists roles like mine which do both. So I don't think experience is necessary. It's about capturing the right skills at the right time to be able to position yourself to be in the position that you want to be at. So if you want to work with a particular firm or you want to work in a particular type of work, upskill yourself within that field to then be able to meet your goal. So yeah, I don't think there's a right time.
Yeah, plus it's also an emerging field right now, so it's good to get a skill set in this particular field.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's something, like I was mentioning, that there's a huge demand for. So experience or not, you can grow very, very quickly in it as well, because the number of skilled professionals are low. So if you are somebody who's good at what they do and you have a basic knowledge which you can acquire in this field, you will grow very, very fast. You will get a lot of opportunities to speak at various forums, to present your work to various people. People acknowledge and recognize that work. People want to integrate that into their workflow. And there are architectural practices that are age old at this point, 100 years old, who would be extremely impressed with some of the work you may be able to do as a fresh graduate or as somebody who's just learned these skills, because to them it's new and to them it's something that they are not able to do. So I don't think work experience really plays that large of a role.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Sahej, for your question. I think somebody raised their hand in the to speak. I mean, if you want to ask your question directly instead of typing it out in the chat, you can also do that. But we have another question here in the chat from Swapnil. It says, I am a third-year architecture student. May I know how can I land an internship in global firms that practices sustainability? I participated in Solar Decathlon India competition and we are in finals. Will that help?
Yeah, firstly, congratulations for making it to the finals of the competition. And yeah, I mean, any credentials that you have would obviously help in landing an internship. But I think honestly, if you have that interest, you should definitely try to land an internship. It's not necessarily so hard. So I can give you the example of UK itself. During the summer in the UK, there are specific programs that a lot of global practices have that are just meant for summer internship programs. So they're typically between 3 to 4 months in duration. The applications for those come in around 6 months or so in advance. So if you want to be able to intern in the summer, usually a lot of these practices will ask you to apply at the start of the year. But because they have these fixed internship programs, it's very well structured, and they will, give you the right sort of experience, the right sort of exposure, guide you exactly how to go about the field, what sort of work you'll be doing in the future in the field, what is your potential in this particular field. So they're really well developed sort of programs that a lot of architectural practices have. So if you just go on to any of their websites, or if you look at their LinkedIn sort of pages, stuff like that, I'm sure you'll find a bunch of them. Though, like I said, I do advise that you start doing that a little early, because a lot of them fill up really quick. But yeah, it's a great idea, and I think if you're interested in that, you should definitely give it a try.
Perfect. I think that's very valuable information, guys. So I hope that you were taking notes on that. So yeah, I think that's the questions that we have for today. And I would like to remind everybody that this webinar will be available in the YouTube channel of 1is2x after the session ends, a couple of days, like 1 or 2 days after the event. So you can also go and check back the information that we discussed and some of the tips that Raghav shared with you. So I just want to thank you, Raghav, once again for joining us today, for sharing your expertise with our audience, and also the audience for joining us in this afternoon. And in this case, it's like 1 or 2 p.m. over there, right, Raghav?
Yes, it's around 2:30 right now. Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Right now it's like 7 a.m. here in Mexico. So yeah.
Not the best time for you, I guess. But yeah, but I think thanks for having me. And like I said, this is something that I'm quite deeply passionate about. So if people are not comfortable asking questions in a public forum, I'm happy for people to reach out to me, separately. It's a topic I love talking about. So yeah, you can feel free to do that as well.
Excellent. So thank you all, everybody, for joining us today, and we'll see each other soon in the next webinar. We'll be talking about computational design. All right. See you guys. And thank you, Raghav, once again.
Thanks. Thanks. Bye-bye.